My name is Clara Reynolds. I'm 31 years old, and I've never really fit into my family. Not in the loud, laughing, memory sharing kind of way. I've always been the quiet one, the observer, the person in the corner who people sometimes forget to ask questions to. But that never really bothered me. Not until the day my grandmother died, and everything I thought I knew about the people who raised me started to come apart. It started during the reading of her will. We were all gathered in the old family estate, the house she'd lived in for nearly 6 decades. A house that smelled like dust, old wood, and secrets. The fireplace crackled, trying its best to cut through the cold tension in the room. My father sat stiffly in the armchair, one hand resting on his knee, the other holding his second scotch. His wife, Linda, my stepmother, perched beside him, a permanent smirk on her face, like she already knew what the will would say. My half-brother Derek lounged with false ease, his phone hidden in his lap, probably checking stock prices, or texting one of his many secretaries. I sat across the room alone on the edge of the old velvet sofa, hands folded in my lap, eyes scanning faces that didn't really see me. When the lawyer opened the will and began reading the expected happened praise for Derek's business ventures, acknowledgement of my father's years of legal service, even a warm note about Linda's graciousness as a companion in Margaret's final years. But when it came to me, it was short. A line. A single sentence. To Clara Reynolds, my beloved granddaughter, I leave something she already knows how to find. That was it. No property, no bank account, no heirlooms. Just a mystery, a riddle, a line that might as well have said, "Figure it out." Everyone looked at me briefly, some with pity, others with thinly veiled amusement. Linda actually smirked wider, like she was glad the weird granddaughter got what she deserved: nothing. I nodded slightly, showing no emotion. I'd learned over the years that any display of feeling in this family was ammunition. The lawyer closed the folder, packed his briefcase, and handed me a small unmarked envelope. He didn't say anything, just pressed it into my hand, and gave me a look that felt strangely like warning. I waited until I was alone in the guest room upstairs to open it. Inside, folded neatly, was a single yellowed piece of paper. On it was a drawing I recognized instantly. I'd made it when I was 7 years old, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table with crayons and a ruler mapping out the house like it was a treasure island. I remember that day clearly, not because of the drawing, but because my grandmother had told me something odd while I was coloring. She'd leaned in and whispered, "Every house has a heart, Clara. Some just hide it better than others." The drawing was of the house, yes, but it wasn't just a child's scribble. It had detail, notes, and one red X drawn in crayon at the far corner of the basement wall. My pulse started to rise. The basement. I hadn't been down there in years. It had always felt off, too quiet, too cold. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I slipped downstairs. The steps creaked under my weight. The air was damp and metallic. I flicked on the bare bulb, illuminating concrete floors and shelves full of dusty boxes. I walked to the far wall, the spot marked on the drawing. It looked like any other part of the basement, but when I tapped lightly, the sound was wrong. Hollow. I ran my fingers along the mortar until I felt a slight give. A brick shifted inward. My breath caught. Behind it, a metal key. I stared at it, then slowly looked around. No one was there. Just me, the shadows, and the key I was never meant to find. I stood there in the cold basement, key in hand, surrounded by the low hum of silence that somehow felt louder than any noise. I didn't know what the key opened, but I had a feeling it wasn't something my family ever expected me to find. That in itself was enough reason to keep going. The next morning, the house was buzzing with low-level tension. My father was making coffee like it was a performance, Linda pretending to flip through a magazine with interest, Derek talking on the phone just a little too loudly. No one mentioned the will. No one asked what had been in the envelope. That was typical. Pretend nothing happened. That's how my family operated. But that silence used to suffocate me. Now it gave me space to think. I left the house without saying a word. Drove 2 blocks to the storage shed out back, the one my grandmother never let anyone touch. It was small, old, with a rusted lock that hadn't been opened in years. I held up the key, heart pounding, and slid it into the lock. It turned without resistance. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, thick with dust and the weight of time. There was only one item inside an old steamer trunk, the kind people use for long ship voyages. I knelt and opened it slowly. Inside were folders, notebooks, and a small black safe. It looked out of place, modern heavy digital. Next to it was a sealed envelope marked for Clara only. My fingers trembled as I opened it. There were instructions, a passcode, and a line in my grandmother's neat handwriting. You always saw more than they wanted you to. Now it's time to see everything. I entered the code and opened the safe. Inside a stack of bank records, several notarized property deeds, a thumb drive, and a handwritten journal. I started reading, slowly at first, then faster. By the time I finished the third page, I was shaking. My grandmother hadn't just loved me, she'd trusted me, protected me, prepared for this moment. Everything in that trunk proved that she had changed her will long ago, 5 years before her death, to leave everything to me. Not just the house, not just the money, everything. But she hadn't wanted a fight. She knew my father, knew Linda, knew Derek. She knew they'd contest the will, so she had created a backup, a hidden record, one that couldn't be tampered with or destroyed because no one knew it existed except me. And now I had it, all of it. I returned to the house with the folder in my bag, heart steady, mind sharp. I didn't say anything, just smiled at Linda when she looked at me like I was a fly on the window. Let Derek brag about his startup that hadn't made $1 in 3 years. Let my father drone on about legacy and family values with the self-importance of a man who thought he could rewrite history by talking long enough. I was used to being ignored. They'd spent years pretending I didn't matter. But I'd been watching, always watching. That night, I went back to my childhood room, the one no one had bothered to clear out. It was still pink and too small, filled with furniture that hadn't been changed since I was 10. I sat on the bed and opened the thumb drive on my laptop. Video files. Dozens. My grandmother had recorded conversations, phone calls, legal meetings. She had documented everything. One file stopped me cold. Meeting with Martin, March 2021. I hit play. There he was, my father, sitting in the very office he used to keep locked when I was little. My grandmother's voice was calm, but sharp. She was confronting him about trying to pressure her into rewriting the will. He was dismissive, irritated, called her old, confused, sentimental, said Derek deserved everything because he was the only real successor in the family. She said nothing for a long time, then softly, "That's why it's going to Clara, because she never asked for anything and you never noticed how much she gave." The video ended. I stared at the screen, stunned. She had seen me. All those years of being invisible, turns out I wasn't. She had known who I was even when I didn't. I copied everything onto a second drive, made 3 backup copies, and emailed them to a secure account. The next day, I visited her lawyer, not the one the family used for the will reading, but the one listed in the journal. He was older, quieter, and when I handed him the documents, he looked up and said, "So you found it." He'd been waiting. She had told him if I ever came to him with the right files, he was to act immediately. That afternoon, he filed a motion with the court to submit the original will, fully notarized, dated, and backed by medical documentation proving her mental competence at the time. He filed it quietly, strategically. He knew how people like my father operated. I returned to the house that night, as if nothing had happened, sat at the dinner table while Linda served overcooked roast and Derek poured overpriced wine. No one noticed the calm in my face. No one saw the shift in my posture, but they would, very soon. The calm before a storm is real. It isn't silence, it's movement in disguise. That weekend, the family planned a memorial brunch in honor of my grandmother. It wasn't her style at all. She hated fussy gatherings. But Linda insisted. Derek brought in a caterer. My father gave a speech. Everyone played their part. I watched them act like we were a normal family, like the past hadn't been years of quiet war and masked cruelty. I watched Linda smile as she greeted distant cousins and made remarks about how Margaret always had such a strong will, the irony thick enough to choke on. Then came the moment Derek had been waiting for, the tour of the estate. He announced to the guests that he would soon be taking over the house, that it would be renovated into a boutique wedding venue. My chest tightened. He walked through the foyer like he already owned it, pointing at staircases, fireplaces, vintage fixtures like they were dollar signs instead of memories. I stood back, unseen, unheard. Again. And that's when I decided I wouldn't wait anymore. I pulled the lawyer aside the next morning and told him I wanted everything activated immediately. He filed a motion to freeze the estate, requested a private review hearing, and filed formal evidence of will forgery based on what we now had: documents, video, audio. I didn't tell my family. I didn't need to. The court would. 4 days later, they were served at the house, right in the middle of Derek's meeting with a wedding planner. The woman had a binder open on the dining table, swatches of pastel colors and floral designs spread like battle plans. Linda was offering champagne. My father was on a call in the study. Then the knock came. A man in a dark suit, professional, calm, papers in hand. Derek opened the door with that fake charm he used on investors. 30 seconds later, his face dropped. Linda stepped forward. Her hand trembled when she took her own copy. My father came out of the study demanding answers and froze when he saw the court seal. I walked down the stairs slowly, not saying a word. Just watch them read. Watch their mouths move, eyes narrow, voices rise. Then I spoke. "You shouldn't have tried to erase her wishes," I said. "She trusted me to protect them." The room went silent. My father's mouth opened, then shut. Linda's face drained of color. Derek laughed, a hollow, nervous sound. "This is ridiculous," he said. She was old, confused. She told us. She told you nothing I said. I have video, audio, dates, doctor's notes, witnesses. She updated her will 5 years ago. Everything is documented. I walked over, set a flash drive on the dining table, and met Derek's eyes. "Play it. Or wait until court. Makes no difference to me." I turned and left. That evening, I sat in the guest room and watched as chaos bloomed downstairs. Raised voices, slammed doors, my father yelling about reputations, Derek pacing the porch like he could walk out of this, Linda crying, but not out of guilt, out of fear, because the foundation they'd stood on for years had just cracked. The court date was set for the following Tuesday. It was private estate law allowed discretion, and my lawyer ensured the documents were filed strategically to keep media attention low for now. We weren't doing this for public drama. We were doing it for truth. When we walked into that courtroom, I was calm. The room was small, sterile, beige, nothing dramatic. But the energy was thick. The judge had the files in hand, a thick folder of evidence. Derek and Linda sat across from me with their attorney, who looked as if he'd aged 10 years since taking the case. My father sat behind them, arms crossed, lips tight. He refused to look at me. The judge read silently for a long time. Then she looked up. "Miss Reynolds, your evidence is extensive, verified. Your grandmother's capacity to make decisions was medically documented. The documents in question have been notarized by a third party and corroborated by video. Do you have anything else to add?" I stood. Only this: my grandmother knew what this family was. She knew how easily her wishes could be buried. That's why she left the truth to me, not because I asked, but because she knew I wouldn't let them rewrite her ending. The judge nodded. "Motion to reinstate original will is approved. All subsequent claims are voided. The estate belongs to Miss Reynolds, effective immediately." I sat down. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just exhaled, the breath I hadn't known I was holding. Derek slammed his chair back as he stood. "This is theft," he hissed. "She manipulated her. Claire's been waiting for this. She doesn't even care about family." I turned to him slowly. "You're right. I don't care about what you call family, because what I had with her was real. And she knew what you were long before I did." Linda reached for him, tried to pull him back, but he shook her off. "You'll be alone in that house," he sneered. "No one's going to come visit your little shrine." I stood up, picked up the flash drive, and said one last thing. "Good. I like quiet." They left the courtroom in a cloud of rage and disbelief. Derek storming out first, Linda chasing after him with shrill whispers, and my father, true to form, saying nothing at all. He just looked at me like I had personally undone some great legacy he imagined he was passing down, then turned and walked away. No apology, no acknowledgement, just his back retreating as it always had when things got inconvenient. I didn't follow. I sat there for a while after the judge left in that echoing room, where something in me had finally shifted. Not in a loud, triumphant way, not with fanfare or fists in the air. It was quieter than that, like a door had closed for good, and behind it, the girl who used to crave their approval no longer existed. I went back to the estate that evening alone. The house felt different, not just because it was mine now, not legally or financially, but spiritually. It was mine because it had always been where I felt safest, and now I could protect it the way she had protected me. I wandered through the room, slowly touching the banister, the corners of old door frames, the edge of the stained glass window she'd loved. Everything held a memory. I didn't plan to live there forever, but I needed to be there for a while to re-anchor myself. The first night alone in the house was eerily quiet, but not empty. I felt her there, not as a ghost, but as something stronger, an intention woven into the walls. The next morning I received a letter by courier, no return address, just my name written in perfect script. I opened it with hesitation, unsure whether it would be more legal drama or a threat dressed in formality. But it was neither. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words: "Come to the sunroom. Noon." No signature. Just the words. The sunroom had always been her favorite space. A glass-walled room filled with plants' afternoon light, and the kind of peace no one in our family ever deserved. I went. At exactly noon. I wasn't expecting anything. I thought maybe it was something she arranged before her death, another breadcrumb in her quiet trail of plans. But when I stepped into the room, I found someone already there. Linda. She was sitting in my grandmother's favorite wicker chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes red-rimmed but dry. She looked different, smaller, older. She gestured for me to sit across from her. I didn't move. "Why are you here?" I asked. Her voice was hoarse. "I need to tell you something. Before it gets worse." I stayed standing. "Worse for who?" She looked away, swallowed, and then said something I wasn't prepared for. "We knew about the will. Months ago. Before she died." I froze. She kept talking. "She told your father. Said she had updated everything and that you would inherit it all. He didn't take it well. Neither did Derek. So what did you do?" I said. Voice low. "Break into her files. Forge a new one." She shook her head. "No, we didn't forge it. We convinced her to reconsider. Derek begged her. Said he'd turn his life around, that you wouldn't know what to do with the responsibility. Your father, he said it would break the family. That's why she agreed to meet with a lawyer one more time." I narrowed my eyes. "But she didn't change it, did she?" Linda's voice cracked. "No, she met him. But when she realized he'd been chosen by Martin, she refused to sign anything. She said she trusted only you." She paused. "But then she got sick. Fast. And we thought maybe she had changed her mind and hadn't had time to update it again." I folded my arms. "So you decided to act like she had?" "Yes," she whispered. "We were wrong. And I know it doesn't fix anything, but I thought you should know. It wasn't just greed. It was fear. Fear that you would cut us out." "You were never in," I said quietly. "Not with her. Not with me." She looked like she might cry, but no tears came. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you don't believe me, but I am." I sat down slowly. "You're right. I don't believe you. But I don't need your apology. I have her truth. That's all I needed." She nodded. "We're leaving town. Derek's going to try and sue, but it won't go anywhere." "Your father, I don't know. He hasn't spoken to me since the court hearing." "He never spoke much to begin with," I said. "Except to himself." She smiled faintly. "I thought I hated you, but I think I just hated that you saw through all of us." "I did," I said. "And I still do." When she left, I didn't feel better, but I did feel lighter. A few days later, Derek made his move, filed an appeal based on emotional manipulation and mental instability. It was thrown out in less than a week. The court had already reviewed everything. His last grasp for control evaporated on paper. He sent me a text. Just one sentence. "You'll regret this." I didn't reply. Because I wouldn't. I never would. The day the final ruling came, in upholding the original will and permanently sealing the estate under my name, I didn't celebrate. There was no bottle of champagne, no victory lap. I simply stood in the hallway of the house just outside my grandmother's old bedroom and let the silence tell me what it needed to. I'd won, but not in the way people usually mean. This wasn't about money or property. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about truth, about restoring something that had been slowly stolen for decades, respect, recognition, and the quiet dignity of being seen. The house was mine now. Officially, every corner, every floorboard, every window that rattled in the wind. I didn't rush to renovate it. I didn't gut the inside and start over. I lived in it. I learned it. I spent the first few weeks walking the halls barefoot, touching walls like they were old friends. I discovered little things I'd forgotten, notes scribbled in drawers, pressed flowers between books, teacups in strange cabinets, reminders of a life lived thoughtfully. And I remembered, not just her, but me. The girl who had once felt so small in these rooms now filled them with intention. I made a decision. I wouldn't turn the estate into a business. I wouldn't rent it out or flip it or auction off its soul. I would preserve it, not as a museum, but as a space for restoration. I opened a foundation in her name, the Margaret House, a space for women starting over women left out of their own stories, women like me. It wasn't grand, just 3 bedrooms, a small studio space, and a garden out back that I planted with my own hands. I kept it quiet, no press, no online tours, just word of mouth. A soft echo of what she gave me: safety space, and the freedom to exist without performance. The first woman who came through was named Eleanor, early 40s. Lost her job, her home, her sense of self. She stayed for 2 months, helped me repaint the study, and when she left, she hugged me like we'd known each other in another life. We probably had. One night, a few weeks after the foundation opened, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, and I'd learned to be wary. But something in me said, "Pick up." "Clara," a voice said. It was my father. I didn't speak. I heard about the foundation, he said. About what you're doing with the house. Still, I said nothing. I was wrong, he said finally. About everything. I let that hang there untouched. Then I said, "You don't get to rewrite this." "I know," he said, "but I wanted you to hear me say it." "Why now?" I asked. He paused. "Because your grandmother believed in you and I didn't. And now I see what she saw." "You didn't want to see it," I corrected. "There's a difference." He didn't argue. "I won't bother you again," he said. "I just needed to say it once." "You did?" I said and hung up. I stared out at the dark for a long time after that, wondering if closure was supposed to feel more final. But it didn't. It just felt like a chapter quietly closing itself. Months passed, then a year. The house changed slowly, not in design, but in energy. Laughter returned to its halls. Not the sharp performative kind from family dinners, but real laughter, soft, surprised healing. The rooms became warm again, alive. Sometimes I'd sit in the sunroom where Linda once confessed and imagine my grandmother watching from her favorite chair, nodding quietly satisfied. And I'd whisper, "I kept my promise." Because I had. Not just to her, but to myself. In the end, I didn't just inherit her house, I inherited her will. Not the legal kind, but the deeper one. The determination to protect truth, to make space for women like us. To remember that silence doesn't mean weakness, and kindness doesn't mean surrender. People think revenge is loud, that it's fire and fury and shattered glass. But the most powerful revenge I ever took was building something beautiful in the ruins they left me. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't look like mourning. It looks like silence. It looks like a woman walking through an empty house, not crying, not screaming, just breathing differently. That's how I grieved my family. Not because they died, but because the version of them I'd built in my mind, the one that might someday love me properly, finally crumbled. And in its place, I didn't find rage. I found peace. That was the unexpected part. That peace didn't come from confronting them. It didn't come from the courtroom ruling or the documents or even the truth being heard. It came from what I did next, from choosing not to become them, from choosing not to spend my life chasing validation from people incapable of offering it. For years, I thought strength meant holding everything together, being quiet, being good, not causing waves. But strength, I've learned, is what you find when everything breaks and you keep going anyway. Strength is putting your name on the deed they never wanted you to have, walking through a front door they thought you'd never own, and turning that house into a sanctuary instead of a battlefield. And for anyone out there who's been left out, underestimated, or quietly erased, let me tell you this: you don't need their permission to exist. You don't need their apology to heal. And you sure as hell don't need their love to become whole. Some of us are born into families that don't see us. That's a loss. But it's not the end. You get to build something different. You get to decide what legacy means. For me, it meant peeling away the lies brick by brick until all that remained was the truth, and then rebuilding from there. Not bitterly, not vengefully, but intentionally, with care, with clarity. My grandmother taught me that. Not with words, but with action. She didn't just leave me keys and codes and journals, she left me a map back to myself. Because she knew long before I did that one day I'd be strong enough to follow it. And I was. I am. I think that's what life is at its core. A series of moments where you decide, will I carry this pain forward or will I put it down? Will I let it define me or will I reshape it into something useful? And if you're lucky, if you're quiet long enough to hear yourself, you'll realize the most radical thing you can do is choose softness anyway. Even when you've been hardened by years of being overlooked. Even when the world tells you to armor up, there is strength in not becoming cruel. There is courage in still believing in kindness, even when you've seen how ugly people can be. When I walk through the halls of this house now, I don't feel haunted. I feel rooted. I've planted things literal and metaphorical that are growing. Every guest who stayed here has added something, a painting, a story, a scar. And every one of them has reminded me that I wasn't the only one carrying invisible wounds. I just happened to be the one with a place to put them down. And that is the quiet revolution. That is the legacy worth protecting. Not furniture, not stocks, not property lines, but restoration. And if you're someone who's been holding yourself together for decades, let me tell you, it's not too late. It's not too late to start again. It's not too late to write a different ending. Even if you're over 50, even if you're over 70, even if your story has been silence and survival until now, you get to begin again. I did, and I wouldn't change a thing.